My parents didn't just skip my wedding, they erased me from it, all because I dared to marry before their precious, perfect daughter. While I stood in my tux at Butchart Gardens, heart bleeding, staring at their empty chairs, they were in Vancouver, throwing a lavish bash for her, laughing like my pain meant nothing. The betrayal cuts deeper than any bullet I took in Afghanistan, a wound so raw it screams inside me. Years of being invisible, of swallowing their rejection, it's too much to bear. And this is the story of their perfect family crumbling under its own lies. I'm James Carter, 34 years old, a veteran who faced the deserts of Afghanistan and came home with a bravery medal pinned to my chest. But to my parents, Robert and Linda Carter, that medal might as well be a paperweight. They run a fancy antique shop on Victoria's Inner Harbor, their pride and joy, where they polish their perfect family image like it's a priceless heirloom. Meanwhile, I'm just a shadow in their spotlight, a 6'2" software engineer in Victoria who's never been enough. My sister, Emma, 31, is their golden child. She's a fashion designer whose face graced Vancouver Fashion's cover, her every move celebrated like a Stanley Cup win. When she landed her first big contract in Toronto, they threw a bash at the Empress Hotel, with champagne and cousins flown in from Calgary. My medal? A mumbled "nice job, James," before they planned Emma's next photo shoot. Growing up in our cedar-shingled house overlooking the Pacific, I watched Emma dominate. She scored hat tricks in hockey, won art fairs, and had mom and dad cheering ringside or framing her sketches. Me? I was the kid who enlisted at 19, survived 40-degree heat and roadside bombs, only to hear mom say, "James, if you pushed harder, you could shine like Emma." It stung worse than any shrapnel. Even at Remembrance Day ceremonies, when folks in Victoria clapped for my service, my parents barely looked up from Emma's latest Instagram post. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, like no matter what you do, you're just not enough? That's been my life, until I met Sophie, my rock, who saw the real me. But when I told my parents we were engaged, their silence screamed louder than any bomb I faced overseas. Growing up in our cedar-shingled house on the bluffs of Victoria, overlooking the Salish Sea, I learned early that I was the spare to Emma's heir. My sister, Emma, 31 years old, was the sun in my parents' universe, her every step a dazzling orbit they couldn't stop watching. Me? I was the moon, barely noticed unless I eclipsed her shine. At 10, I watched Emma, then 7, score a hat trick in a peewee hockey game at Save-On Foods Memorial Center. The stands erupted, and my parents, Robert and Linda Carter, leapt to their feet, screaming her name like she'd won the Stanley Cup. I sat there, clutching my own stick, my teams win the week before forgotten. That's our girl. Dad bellowed, while Mom snapped photos for the family scrapbook. My games? They were too busy with their antique shop on Government Street to show up. By high school, Emma's star only burned brighter. She won art contests, her watercolors of Beacon Hill Park hung in the local gallery, each one framed like a masterpiece in our living room. I was 15, gangly at 6'2", trying to find my place. I joined the cadets, dreaming of serving Canada like the veterans I saw at Remembrance Day on Dallas Road. When I earned my first marksmanship badge, I rushed home, heart pounding, to show Mom. She glanced at it, then said, "That's nice, James, but Emma's got a scholarship interview in Vancouver tomorrow. Help her practice, eh?" My chest tightened, the badge heavy in my hand. It was always Emma, her goals, her dreams, her spotlight. At 19, I enlisted, shipped off to Afghanistan, where 40-degree heat and sandstorms tested every ounce of my will. I survived patrols, dodged IEDs, and came home at 22 with a bravery medal for pulling a wounded comrade to safety. You'd think that'd earn a parade, or at least a hug. Instead, Dad patted my shoulder and said, "Good work, son," before turning to Emma's latest triumph. She just signed with a Toronto fashion house. They threw a party at the Empress Hotel, 10 kilometers from our house, with crab cakes and cousins from Kelowna. Emma's first magazine cover, shot against the Rockies, was blown up and hung above the fireplace, where my medal never made it. "James, you could be like Emma if you tried harder," Mom said once, her voice sharp as a skate blade. Tried harder? I'd faced death for this country, and it wasn't enough. Emma's rise never stopped. By 25, she was a fashion designer, her name splashed across Vancouver fashion's pages, her dresses worn at galas in Banff. My parents bragged about her at every Victoria community event, their antique shop customers nodding along. I was 28, building a career as a software engineer, coding apps that powered local startups. Decent work, pays $80,000 a year, but to Robert and Linda, it was invisible next to Emma's glamour. At a family barbecue by Gonzales Beach, I overheard Dad tell Uncle Mark, "Emma's our pride and joy." James? He's doing all right, I guess. All right. That word hit harder than any bullet. The worst came at a Remembrance Day ceremony 3 years ago. I stood in my uniform, medal pinned to my chest, as Victoria's mayor shook my hand. My parents were there, but not for me. They were busy snapping photos of Emma, who designed a poppy-themed scarf for a charity auction. Look at Emma, giving back. Mom gushed to a neighbor, while I stood 10 meters away, my service just a footnote. Have you ever poured your soul into something, your country, your family, only to be pushed aside for someone else's shine? That's what I lived through, year after year, until Sophie walked into my life at a veterans fundraiser. She saw me, not Emma's shadow. But when I told my parents we were engaged, their response wasn't joy, it was a cold, deafening silence that said I'd never measure up. 3 years ago, I met Sophie at a veterans fundraiser in Victoria's Beacon Hill Park, where the spring cherry blossoms framed her smile. She was a 30-year-old elementary school teacher, 5'6" with a laugh that cut through my scars like a breeze off the Salish Sea. We clicked over shared stories of volunteering at local food banks, her warmth seeing past the medals and the trauma I carried from Afghanistan. After 3 years of dating, hiking the trails of Goldstream Park, sipping coffee at Murchie's on Government Street, I proposed under the totem poles at Thunderbird Park, 2 kilometers from my parents' antique shop. She said yes, and for the first time, I felt like I was enough. But when I shared the news with Robert and Linda, my parents, their response was a gut punch. "You're getting married now?" Mom asked, her voice sharp as a winter wind off the Pacific. "Emma's not even engaged yet, James. Are you sure you're not rushing?" Dad just stared at his phone, silent, like I'd announced a dentist appointment. Planning our wedding was supposed to be a joy, but it became a battlefield. Sophie and I chose Butchart Gardens, 20 kilometers north of Victoria, for a summer ceremony under the Rose Arches, a dream spot for any Canadian couple. I sent Mom and Dad a text, asking for help picking the venue. No reply. I called, left voicemails, even dropped by their shop on Government Street, where they were busy appraising a vintage maple leaf brooch. "We're swamped, James," Dad said, barely looking up. "Emma's got a big fashion show in Toronto soon. Maybe ask her for tips." Tips? I was planning my wedding, not a runway. I later found out Mom had already created a Pinterest board for Emma's imaginary wedding at Banff's Fairmont Chateau, complete with ice sculptures and silk drapes, while my real one got nothing. Sophie's parents stepped in, driving 100 kilometers from Nanaimo to help us choose table settings and taste cakes at Thrifty Foods. Her mom, Diane, hugged me and said, "You're family now, James. We've got you." It was the kind of warmth I'd craved from my own parents, but it didn't fill the hole. I sent out invitations, paper ones with embossed maple leaves and emails with red receipts, to ensure Robert and Linda knew. I checked the RSVPs daily, my heart sinking with every no response from them. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called Mom. "Are you coming?" I asked, voice cracking. "We're checking our schedules," she said, cold as a February morning in Victoria. "It's a busy time at the shop." Busy? For their son's wedding? The day arrived, August 15, 2023, a perfect 24-degree day at Butchart Gardens. Sophie glowed in her ivory gown, and I stood tall in my tux, my bravery medal pinned inside my jacket, a secret nod to my strength. The garden was alive with 200 guests, the air sweet with roses and sea salt. But as I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked on the front row, 2 empty chairs, reserved for Robert and Linda. My stomach twisted, the pain sharper than any wound from Kandahar. Sophie squeezed my hand, her eyes saying, "I'm here." But during the father-daughter dance, when Sophie twirled with her dad, I stood alone, no father to share that moment with me. I overheard a cousin whisper, "Where are Robert and Linda?" Another replied, "Probably with Emma." That cut deeper than I can describe. After the reception, I checked my phone, still no message, no apology. I called Dad, my voice shaking with rage. "Did you even get the invite?" I demanded. "Must have got lost in the mail," he said, flat as the Pacific on a calm day. But the email read receipt showed they'd opened it weeks ago. They lied, and I knew it. Have you ever stood in the happiest moment of your life, only to feel your family stab you in the back? That was my wedding day, a day of love tainted by their absence, a wound I carried into our honeymoon, setting the stage for the truth I'd soon uncover. The honeymoon in Tofino should have been all crashing waves and starlit walks, but the ache of those empty chairs at Butchart Gardens clung to me like damp Pacific mist. Sophie and I returned to Victoria, 300 kilometers from the surf, hoping to bury the hurt of my parents' absence. I needed answers. Why did Robert and Linda, my own flesh and blood, skip the one day that meant everything to me? I'd checked the read receipts, those emails and paper invites with embossed maple leaves reached them. Their "lost in the mail" excuse was a lie, and I knew it. So, I drove to their antique shop on Government Street, my heart pounding like a drum at a powwow. They weren't there. The clerk said they'd taken a last-minute trip to Vancouver. That's when my phone buzzed with a call from Aunt Clara, my mom's sister, who lives 100 kilometers away in Nanaimo. Her voice trembled, like she was about to shatter my world. "James, I can't keep this in anymore," Clara said, her words heavy as the fog over the Salish Sea. "Your parents weren't just absent from your wedding. They were in Vancouver, throwing a party for Emma, at the Fairmont Pacific Rim, no less." My breath caught, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. A party? For Emma? On August 15, 2023, while I stood alone in my tux, 120 kilometers away, my parents had rented a private dining room, complete with oysters and champagne, to cheer up Emma. Why? Because, Clara said, they told us you getting married first broke her heart. They said Emma deserved to be the first Carter bride. Broke her heart? I'd poured mine out on that altar, and they chose her feelings over my life's biggest moment. I pulled over on Dallas Road, the ocean roaring in my ears, and Clara kept talking. They invited half the family, cousins from Kelowna, even Uncle Mark from Calgary. They said it was to lift Emma's spirits after your selfish decision to wed first. Selfish? I'd survived roadside bombs in Afghanistan, carried a wounded buddy 500 meters to safety, and come home to build a life with Sophie. Selfish? The word burned like a wildfire. Clara said Mom had stood at the party, toasting Emma's bright future, while Dad bragged about her latest fashion line hitting Holt Renfrew. Not one mention of me, their son, who'd married that day. "We thought you knew," Clara whispered. Knew? How could I know my own parents would betray me so completely? The pain was a knife, twisting deeper than any wound from Kandahar. I'd faced death at 22, felt the heat of 40-degree deserts, and thought nothing could break me. But this was worse. My parents didn't just skip my wedding, they orchestrated a celebration to erase it, to prop up Emma's ego while I stood alone, my bravery medal hidden inside my jacket. I called Sophie, my voice cracking like ice on a frozen lake. "They threw a party for her, Soph," I said. "On our day." She was silent, then whispered, "James, we're your family now. They don't get to define you." Her words were a lifeline, but the betrayal still drowned me. I sat there, staring at the waves, the hurt so raw it felt like my chest was caving in. Have you ever given everything to your family, your love, your sacrifice, only to have them spit in your face? That's what Robert and Linda did. They didn't just choose Emma, they built a shrine to her on the ashes of my happiest day. I thought of every Remembrance Day I'd stood proud in Victoria, believing family was my anchor. Now, I saw the truth. Their perfect Carter name was a lie, built on my pain. Aunt Clara's call wasn't just a revelation, it was the moment I realized I'd never been their son, just a shadow they ignored while Emma shone. The rage, the heartbreak, it was too much to bear, and it set me on a path to confront them, to demand why they'd chosen her over me. The truth about my parents' betrayal hit me like a rogue wave off Tofino's Chesterman Beach, leaving me gasping for air. Aunt Clara's words, that Robert and Linda threw a glitzy party for Emma at the Fairmont Pacific Rim while I stood alone at Butchart Gardens, burned in my chest, hotter than the 40-degree deserts of Afghanistan. I couldn't let it fester any longer. 2 days after Clara's call, on August 17, 2023, I drove 5 kilometers from my apartment in Victoria's James Bay to my parents' cedar-shingled house overlooking the Salish Sea. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, the same hands that once carried a wounded comrade 500 meters to safety. I wasn't just their son anymore, I was a 34-year-old veteran, 6'2", ready to demand answers for a wound deeper than any war could inflict. I found Robert and Linda in their living room, surrounded by polished antiques, Emma's framed magazine cover glaring down from above the fireplace. The air was thick, like the fog that blankets Victoria in November. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but trembling with years of pent-up rage. Mom's eyes darted to Dad, her hands fidgeting with a vintage teacup. "About what, James?" she asked, her tone as cold as a January wind off Dallas Road. "About why you skipped my wedding," I shot back, "to throw a party for Emma, 120 kilometers away, on the one day that was mine." Silence fell, heavy as a fallen Douglas fir. Dad stood, his 5'10" frame rigid, and snapped, "You're blowing this out of proportion, James. We were supporting Emma, she was upset you got married first." "Upset?" The word ignited a fire in me. "Upset?" I roared, stepping closer, my voice cracking like ice on a frozen lake. "I faced death in Afghanistan, carried a bravery medal home, and you couldn't even show up to see me marry Sophie? You chose Emma's ego over your own son." Mom flinched, but her voice stayed sharp. "James, you're being selfish. Emma's worked so hard for her career. We had to be there for her." "There for her?" The betrayal twisted like a knife, slicing through 34 years of trying to be enough. I paced the room, my boots thudding on their hardwood floor, imported from a mill in Nanaimo. "You invited cousins from Kelowna, Uncle Mark from Calgary, to a champagne-soaked party while I stood alone in my tux, 200 guests wondering where you were," I said, my eyes burning. "Do you know what that felt like? To have no parents at my side, no one to toast my future with Sophie?" Dad's face hardened, his voice cutting through the air. "You're tearing this family apart, James. We're trying to keep things together, and you're making it about you." "Making it about me?" The audacity hit like a slap. This was about me. I shouted. "My wedding, my life, and you erased it for Emma's tantrum." Mom stood now, her 5'5" frame trembling, but not with guilt, with defiance. "You've always been jealous of Emma's success," she hissed. "We gave you everything, James, but you never shone like her. You can't blame us for that." "Jealous?" I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off their antique-laden walls. "Jealous? I'm not jealous of Emma's magazine covers or her Toronto contracts. I'm jealous of the love you poured into her, the love you never spared for me, even after I bled for this country." The room went still, the weight of my words sinking in. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in Dad's eyes, but Mom doubled down. "You're twisting this, James," she said. "We never meant to hurt you. You're just too sensitive." Too sensitive? I'd survived war, carried the weight of their neglect for decades, and now I was too sensitive. I stepped toward the door, my heart pounding like a drum at a Victoria Day parade. "You didn't just hurt me," I said, voice low and steady now, "you broke me. But I'm done begging for your scraps." I walked out, the Salish Sea glittering in the distance, leaving their perfect Carter facade to crumble. Have you ever faced the people who were supposed to love you most, only to see they never truly did? That confrontation wasn't just a fight, it was the moment I reclaimed my voice, setting the stage for what came next. The confrontation with my parents left me raw, like I'd been dragged across the jagged rocks of Victoria's Gonzales Beach. I'd stormed out of their cedar-shingled house on August 17, 2023, my heart a battlefield, scarred from their betrayal at my wedding and Aunt Clara's revelation about their party for Emma at the Fairmont Pacific Rim. I thought the war was over, but Emma, my 31-year-old sister, had other plans. A week later, on August 24th, I was at my James Bay apartment, 5 kilometers from my parents' antique shop, trying to rebuild with Sophie, my 30-year-old wife, whose strength anchored me like the lighthouses dotting Vancouver Island. That's when my phone lit up with a text from Sophie, her words slicing through the calm like a storm off the Salish Sea. "James, you won't believe what Emma just sent me," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. Sophie showed me the messages, and I felt the rage boil up again, hot as a July day in Afghanistan's 40-degree deserts. Emma, the fashion designer whose face graced Vancouver fashion, had texted Sophie from her sleek Toronto condo, 3,400 kilometers away. "Sophie, as James's wife, you need to help him see reason," her first message read, all polished and patronizing, like she was addressing a junior intern. "He's tearing our family apart with his jealousy over my engagement. My wedding at Banff's Fairmont Chateau is a big deal, and he's trying to ruin it." Jealousy? Ruin her wedding? I'd barely spoken to Emma since my own wedding on August 15th, when she didn't even send a card. But she wasn't done. "James has always been sensitive," she wrote, "but you're his wife now. You can make him stop spreading lies about Mom and Dad. It's hurting my big day." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off our apartment's cedar-paneled walls. Emma thought she could manipulate Sophie, a 5'6" teacher who'd faced down rowdy grade 5 classes and stood by me through war's aftermath. "She's got some nerve," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling with defiance as we sat on our balcony overlooking the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Then came Emma's final jab. "Sophie, think about your future. Aligning with me and my connections in Vancouver's fashion scene could open doors for you both. Don't let James drag you down with his grudges." I roared with laughter, the kind that hurts your sides. Emma, thinking she could bribe Sophie with her Holt Renfrew clout? She didn't know my wife at all. Sophie's response was pure gold. She texted back, "Emma, I'm James's wife, not his keeper. He's not jealous, he's hurt because your parents chose your party over his wedding. If you care about family, maybe start with an apology. Good luck with Banff." I could have kissed her right there, 10 meters from the ocean's edge. But Emma's plan unraveled faster than a cheap sweater. Aunt Clara called the next day, her voice buzzing with gossip from Nanaimo, 100 kilometers north. "James, the family's talking," she said. "After what your parents did, throwing that party for Emma on your wedding day, people are done." Cousins from Kelowna, who'd attended Emma's Vancouver bash, started canceling their RSVPs to her engagement party at Banff's Chateau Lake Louise, 700 kilometers from Victoria. Even a top Vancouver designer, who'd promised Emma a custom gown, backed out, citing scheduling conflicts after hearing the family buzz. The news hit like a slap shot in overtime. Uncle Mark from Calgary, usually silent to keep the peace, texted me, "James, we didn't know the full story. We're not going to Emma's party. You deserved better." The family's rejection of Emma's event wasn't just a snub, it was a tidal wave, washing away her carefully curated spotlight. Emma's manipulation had backfired, her attempt to control Sophie exposing her desperation to keep the Carter name polished. I sat with Sophie that night, the Victoria skyline twinkling 2 kilometers away, and we laughed until tears streamed down our faces. Have you ever watched someone try to pull you down, only to trip over their own lies? Emma thought she could rewrite my pain, but instead, she handed me and Sophie a victory, one that proved our bond was stronger than her schemes. Emma's failed attempt to manipulate Sophie, and the family's rejection of her Banff engagement party, felt like a victory lap after a lifetime of skating in her shadow. It was August 25, 2023, and I sat with Sophie on our James Bay balcony, 5 kilometers from my parents' antique shop in Victoria, watching the sun dip below the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The rage that had burned through me, through the empty chairs at Butchart Gardens, Aunt Clara's revelation about the Vancouver party, and the shouting match with Robert and Linda, was finally cooling, like a summer evening after a 30-degree day. I wasn't just a 34-year-old veteran who'd survived Afghanistan's 40-degree deserts. I was a man reclaiming his worth, no longer begging for scraps of love from a family obsessed with Emma's shine. Sophie, my 30-year-old rock, leaned against me, her 5'6" frame warm in the 15-degree dusk. "You're free now, James," she said, her voice soft as the waves lapping Dallas Road. "They can't dim you anymore." Free. The word hit like a puck finding the net in overtime. For years, I'd carried the weight of Robert and Linda's dismissal, my bravery medal ignored, my software engineering career shrugged off, my wedding erased for Emma's ego. But now, with Sophie's hand in mine, I saw the truth. I didn't need their approval to shine. I'd built a life, coding apps for Victoria startups, hiking Goldstream Park's 10-kilometer trails, volunteering at veterans events, worth more than their antique-laden living room or Emma's Holt Renfrew dresses. The family fallout was the final crack in their perfect Carter facade. After Uncle Mark's text and the cousins' cancellations, even more relatives pulled back from Emma's plans. A family friend, who owns a bakery in Nanaimo, 100 kilometers north, refused to make her engagement cake, saying, "James deserved better than what you all did." The gossip spread like wildfire at a Victoria Day barbecue, with whispers at community hockey games and coffee shops along Government Street. Robert and Linda called me the next day, their voices sharp as skate blades. "You're poisoning the family against Emma," Mom accused, her tone dripping with the same defiance I'd heard in their living room. "You're making us look like monsters." Dad added, "We supported you both, James. Why can't you let Emma have her moment?" Her moment? I laughed, the sound raw but liberated. "You gave her my wedding day," I said, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "I'm not poisoning anyone, the truth is doing that for me." That call was the last I took from them. I hung up, my heart no longer a battlefield but a quiet forest, like the one surrounding Whistler, where Sophie and I planned to celebrate our first anniversary. We'd booked a cabin, 120 kilometers from Vancouver, to ski the 2,000-meter slopes and toast our future under the stars. I wasn't running from my past, I was building a new one, with a family that chose me. Sophie's parents, who'd driven 100 kilometers from Nanaimo for our wedding, were already planning to join us, their warmth a stark contrast to Robert and Linda's coldness. Even Aunt Clara sent a card, saying, "You're stronger than they'll ever know, James. Here's what I've learned, and I hope it hits you as hard as it hit me. First, don't wait for someone else's approval to define your worth." I spent years chasing Robert and Linda's pride, but my value was in my service, my love, my life, not their applause. Second, family isn't blood, it's the people who stand by you, like Sophie, who saw me when I was invisible. Third, forgive, but set boundaries. I've let go of the anger, but I've drawn a line to protect my peace, like a goalie guarding the net. Have you ever had to walk away from people you love to save yourself? It's hard, but it's freedom. Take a page from my book, find your Whistler, your place to heal, whether it's a 10-kilometer hike or a quiet coffee at Murchie's. Live for you, not for someone else's spotlight. I'm James Carter, and for the first time, I'm proud of who I am, not who they wanted me to be. Sitting here on my James Bay balcony, 5 kilometers from the Victoria skyline, I watch the sun rise over the Strait of Juan de Fuca, painting the sky with hues of maple red. It's August 26, 2023, and for the first time in my 34 years, I feel unburdened. The pain of Robert and Linda's betrayal, the empty chairs at Butchart Gardens, Emma's manipulative texts, they're fading, like morning mist over Goldstream Park. Sophie, my 30-year-old anchor, sits beside me, her hand in mine, reminding me that family is who chooses you, not who hurts you. I've walked through Afghanistan's deserts, faced my parents' lies, and laughed at Emma's failed schemes. Now, I'm standing tall, not as a shadow, but as James Carter, a veteran who's found his own light. This journey wasn't just mine, it's for anyone who's felt invisible, who's fought for love that should have come freely. If my story hit you, if it stirred something deep, I'm asking you to join me on this path. Drop a like on this video. It's a small nod to say you see me, that my fight matters. Share your story in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from family to find yourself? Your words might be the lifeline someone else needs, just like Sophie was for me. And if you want more stories of grit and heart, straight from the true north, subscribe to True North Courage. Hit that bell, so you don't miss what's next, maybe a tale from our Whistler anniversary, skiing those 2,000-meter slopes. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for listening to a veteran's story in Victoria, Canada. You've given me a space to heal, to share, to grow. Let's keep this courage alive, together, one story at a time.